Hey there, Golden Bears. How are we today? I hope you've been keeping it classy since we've seen each other last. Today we're going to embark on America entering World War II, wondering if we will or will we not. I imagine if you know the history books, you know that we have. Hold on, what do they call that? Spoiler alert. Yeah, spoiler alert. We do enter World War II. But there's a few steps that we need to look at before we get actually into understanding what drew it in. It wasn't just something, a simple decision of Pearl Harbor. It was a multitude of steps. But before we do that, what got us into World War II in our prior discussion, if you remember, was that of the New Deal. And America and the globe was reeling from a global depression that affected everything shore to shore in every countryside, especially across the landscape of Europe, especially hitting Germany and Italy and the countries that were fighting, if you remember, on the central sides. They were the ones that lost the war, and they were there dealing with how do they repay all these loans to France and England, and then also find a way to get their country out of depression as well. And what we're going to discover is out from this ashes will emerge country of Germany that's going to go on a big spending spree, if you will, and gobbling up other countries. Well, with that, we have a quote here, famous by FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, running for his third term. And listen to his quote: "Let no man or woman thoughtlessly or falsely talk of America sending its armies to European fields." That was what he was saying when he was running for his, historical third term. He eventually did get elected, yet it was an event that caused him in 1941 to actually have to be kind of what we see as typical politician. They don't keep their word. Well, before we get started, I want to tell a little story about things, and my story goes back to my 10th grade year in high school. Now, I was involved with, I was at ASB in 8th and 9th grade, involved with school, in sports. Was not new to town, grew up in town all the way from kindergarten on. So, I had a good group of friends, and in that, we had already developed our cliques. And I was kind of fortunate I got to hang out with different cliques because I did enjoy sports. I was above average in school. I enjoyed ASB, but I also liked to party. And I had made some bad choices in all those years. If you met some of my teachers or counselors from back in the day and asked them what was Steger like, they're like, ay, okay. If he did not alone create enough problems for us, I did. And, enough of that. But along came a new girl to town. Her name was Lisa, recently transplanted from the great city of Chino, where her parents were dairy farmers of all things, and they had moved to Hemet and opened up a dairy farm. Yes, at the time, there were about 6 or 7 of them, and her family happened to be one of them. If she wasn't a vision to look at, red hair, blue eyes, incredible ability with numbers, you'll catch my drift on what that means, and everything about her just seemed to be eye-popping. I had the privilege of having her in a class, and she was just engaging and fun, but me, I don't know if it's self-esteem or me not wanting to get the razzing from my friends, it's like I only would talk with her in class or kind of casually engage with her. But outside of the class, I didn't want my peer group to know that I had some interest in Lisa. And it was sad that I took that approach. I mean, we did become even better friends after college, never did date. But all that to say is that I kept my crush on Lisa secret for actually a couple of years. I dated other girls at that time, had a pretty serious girlfriend for one of those years. But all along, I says, man, she's classy, she's awesome. And I frankly look back, wondering why I didn't move upon that, except that I knew that there would be a lot of other people who would have something to say about it, whether they liked her or didn't like her. And that was just kind of the garbage that we did in high school. I'm not sure how it is for you, in your time period of being a high school student, but trust me, there was peer pressure as to who to date, and there was peer pressure of who you shouldn't date. And for some reason, she wasn't on the approved friend list. And, it's a sad situation that I listen to my friends more than that. But we're going to discover that FDR has a crush on another guy. His name is Winston Churchill from England. And we'll talk a little about that crush a little later on and what that means for us. Well, let us go ahead and dive in and what kind of gets America on this road towards going to war. We recognized early that because of the Treaty of Versailles and because there was no pax signed, Germany essentially and Italy was essentially tasked with paying back France and England for the problems they had caused in World War I. And they were unable to pay those debts. And this became a tremendous amount of fuel that I'll talk about here shortly for Adolf Hitler and what allows him to use those negative things to kind of arise to power. But because America did not join the League of Nations, if you remember his name, what was really important during that time, I'm drawing a blank right now. How come I can't? Cabot, that's who it was, Lord Cabot, we like to call him. He and good old Wilson were fighting head to head, and essentially Cabot and Congress had says we're not going to be signing this treaty. And what was the result? America kind of bowed out, and therefore the treaty was like a Rottweiler with no teeth. It just kind of maybe looked ferocious, but Germany and others will quickly discover that, frankly, nothing's going to come of it. Well, with a new president, new offices in mind, we have now FDR kind of coming up with this thing called the Kellogg-Briand Pact, and he didn't come up with it, but some senators did, and they basically wanted to kind of remind America that even though we didn't sign those treaties, we are going to be doing business with the rest of the world. We just want them to know that we're never going to engage with them militaristically if they find themselves in trouble. It's like a fallacy of peace. It's like it would be like around here if they said the speed limit is posted at 45, but you know what? We don't hire any police officers to enforce it. You're going to be going like, gone, I'm 65 rolling down Margarita, yo, because that's what I could do. But the Kellogg-Briand Pact was just that. It kind of gave Americans a sense of peace that we can do business, even though we know it might not be the best thing in the greater interest of long-term peace over there in Europe at the time. Here are a few excerpts of that I'll go over with my Steger Select crew and posse. So the road to war, America's leaders continue to strive for this isolationism, to stay out of ever signing an agreement like the Kellogg-Briand Act that said we don't want to do anything militaristically. Why were we doing that? Well, because we sensed things were brewing in Europe that might be leaning towards war again. But there was also a growing group of people in America, like we have the debt, we had the problems that the Great Depression created. We haven't pulled ourselves out of that, and so you have Gerald Nye, U.S. Senator that had come together and formed this Nye Committee, and this Nye Committee will eventually join with the America First kind of committee, and they declared that what really triggered this or what constituted this war were bankers and munitions makers conspiring to push the U.S. into the war in 1917. Truth or friction, they did find evidence on both sides, but it became very easy for us to blame this, and so there were quite a few Americans who forced Congress and then to sign this idea of a Neutralities Act. And what this did, the Neutralities Act basically said Congress and basically the president, you are going to be handshackled. You're not going to be able to just opt to join into a war if something entangles us again in Europe. We need to be about America first and making sure that we're creating jobs and working on our depression here on our home floor. So here you can see one of those rallies that a famous figure, Charles Lindbergh, did you know the San Diego, where we go fly out of San Diego? Oh, has my screen froze again? There we are. That Lindbergh Field, it's named after him. Charles Lindbergh was an early advocate of being America first. Well, with the difficulty of the economic times, not only landing in America, but its impact that it's having in Europe, emerging a new voice, not certainly a voice of reason, but a voice that probably is not unfamiliar to you, is Adolf Hitler, who declares himself Chancellor of Germany, and he begins to blame the communists and blame the Jews and blame the Treaty of Versailles and the unequal treatment that they got following the World War I as a reason to motivate his people. He then comes up with this, the Naziist type of ideology, which resonated with many Germans at the home front, which is strong sense of national identity and pride, and a strong military backbone, and a strong desire to regain the land that was taken from them post World War I, the Sudetenland and parts of Austria, parts of Poland, and beyond. And so that leads us to this continuing road to war, where Hitler is refusing to repay those payments, and what was going to come of it? He probably was like waiting for Germany and France to come in and say, you haven't paid yet, and nobody stepped in place to do anything. He then signs this accord with Great Britain and France, where Chamberlain comes and gets off of the plane and says, what I have here is a piece of paper that will be peace for all of mankind. And there was no peace. That was short-lived, and that's the ongoing joke, if we will. Basically, doesn't take, but after the ink had signed, Hitler moves his troops into parts of Czechoslovakia in the Sudetenland, and then a month later, he then takes over all of Czechoslovakia. And what do France and Britain do? Well, they do nothing. They just kind of say, well, we hope this appeases him. It's like, we hope it's like a bone for the angry dog in the background, and there'll be enough. Well, at the same time, we have a friend and an ally in Italy with Benito Mussolini, who is, well, taking on these ideas of fascism. And so he marches and invades into Ethiopia and begins intervening in the civil war with Spain. And this creates an opportunity to where Italy can take over parts of Spain for themselves as they move forward. And so America's First Committee continues to, and Lindbergh continues to pressure our president. Don't be listening. La, 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 la. Don't be listening to what's taking place over there in Europe. That's European affairs. We don't need to be part of that. We have our own problems here in dealing with the economic quagmire that we are in. Well, it is then that Germany decides to invade Poland. And it is at this point that by an invasion of Poland, we have Russia on the other side, and Stalin doing some trickery where he signs a treaty and a pact with him, saying with Hitler, and Hitler agrees that I won't invade Russia. You're too big of a country. We don't want to deal with it. We just want Poland. And so that kind of kept Russia out of the war for a while. But it also then forces Britain and France to begin saying, we're going to declare war on Germany and Italy and revamping up. Again, what does Roosevelt do? He responds his reaffirmation of U.S. neutrality, just like me, kind of having my secret crush on Lisa there, that I didn't declare this to anybody as well, just kind of for my own sake. Well, as Germany continued to march, France quickly falls, and they then they use all of their forces and direct them towards England, and begin pounding them by the air, pounding them by the ocean and the boats, and really wreaking havoc. America yearning to still remain neutral, even though many Americans by this time are now flip-flopping, and 80% prior to the war wanted us to stay out. Now 80% of us say, you know what, maybe we should be getting involved because France has fallen, England could be next. What are we going to do to stop this? And so Roosevelt begins lending, if you will, destroyers of America. We signed the Lend-Lease Act that gives away a bunch of equipment, knowing full well that one can't afford to pay us for it, and two, they're not going to return it, but this is just our way of staying out of it. And this is a time where the president begins to say, Congress, I know that we're not going to war, but what would it hurt if we begin basically calling up troops to, see if people are willing to join? And little we know that in less than, a few months, over 16 million men were put into the computer, if you will, the computer, and known that who was eligible for joining the war when it was needed. Well, America is kind of creeping closer and closer, kind of like a little kitty cat looking towards its prey. And even though America and the Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, are the best of buds, here's a picture of them in Newfoundland. One of their first few times that we have of them on record meeting, but they had been on the phone a lot, interacting, engaging. And FDR and Winston Churchill were the best of buds. In fact, Eleanor Roosevelt, Roosevelt's wife, did not care for Winston Churchill too much because he was a bad influence on Roosevelt, she said, because Winston could put down the grog and smoke those cigars and wouldn't sleep more than 2 hours a night and still manage the next day to write eloquent speeches and triumphant soliloquies to champion the cause and unify the people of Britain. And there was FDR, incapable of functioning. But nonetheless, they were fast friends in this whole thing. But even though being friends, and this is what I mean by the secret kind of love that I had, FDR had a secret, that he was fond of Churchill and the defending of democracy. And so as new lifelong friends, what was America going to do? Well, they came together in Newfoundland and signed this Atlantic Charter that essentially said that America and the other democratic countries will come to one another in this time of need. Basically, it was the early steps of what we now know as the United Nations. But which, as I questioned there on my PowerPoint, is this just a continuation of Woodrow Wilson's 14 points? What's new? What's different? Is it stronger? Is it weaker? Well, we'll discuss that a little bit later on. So even though America might be itching towards war, there hasn't been any significant, reason to do this until the Japanese start showing their colors. Now, what would cause the Japanese to begin showing their colors? Well, first of all, they signed the Tripatriot Pact with Germany and Italy, be creating this trifecta of strong fascist type of governments. The second thing they do is they begin encroaching further and further into China and taking over more and more ports and gaining more resources there. Why would that bother America? Well, if you remember, in the early 1900s, we had an open door policy to do trade with them. There were 6 major European countries that were there. And so we slapped the hand of Japan and says, you can't keep doing that. And by the way, you keep doing that, we're going to cause some problems for you. So what are the problems? Is that Roosevelt not only embargoes products going to Japan, but he actually freezes all of their assets they had tied up in America. That's every bank account, every savings account, and any businesses that they had going on there. Another thing is that this kept Japan from gaining more of the land in China that had shown signs of oil that would be necessary for them to create fuel and to keep their industries churning out. What was the result? December 7th, as you know, or maybe not know, but that's when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, thus giving America overwhelming reason to join Winston Churchill and eventually Russia to join in and begin going in the war effort. So we need to recognize that there was a lot of steps that initiated America to joining in. It wasn't just one simple stroke of December 7th and the bombing of our boats and killing, thousands of soldiers in Pearl Harbor. There was quite a few steps, basically starting all the way back to the failure of the Treaty of Versailles and going all the way up until even the failure of our government to officially say, the Kellogg-Briand Pact, that was a meaningless gesture. And so we just hope that this was clear and fun and capable for you to grasp. So with that, Golden Bears, keep it classy, and we'll be seeing you next time.